The New York night skyline viewed from the top floor of a Manhattan high-rise sparkled like scattered jewels. Norma Williams gazed at her reflection in the large glass window, wondering if everything was ready for tomorrow's Christmas. Her refined features and composed demeanor exuded the confidence of a successful architect. "Norma, I've hidden Emily's present in the closet," David's voice called from the living room. As an executive at a Silicon Valley tech company, David provided a comfortable life for his family. He had always respected Norma's career, building a relationship where they celebrated each other's successes. "Thank you," Norma smiled as she walked toward the living room. "Is Emily asleep?" David nodded, looking up from his tablet. "Yes, she can hardly wait for tomorrow morning." "Did you tell her Carol and the others are coming?" Norma's expression clouded slightly. She picked up a wine glass, trying not to show her concern, and took a sip. "Yes, I told her. Emily is looking forward to seeing her cousin Jason." What she didn't say was that Emily wasn't particularly enthusiastic about Aunt Carol's visit. The 14-year-old seemed to sense something beneath her aunt's superficial pleasantness. Carol lived with her businessman husband Michael and their 12-year-old son Jason, and their life appeared perfect. Carol behaved cheerfully in social settings, and everyone was fooled by her charming smile, except Norma. The sisters' relationship was complicated. 3 years ago, Carol and Michael had failed in an investment and couldn't make their mortgage payments. Norma had unhesitatingly offered help, saving their home. She had continued to pay for Jason's private school tuition. Though Carol appeared grateful on the surface, Norma didn't miss the occasional glint of envy in her sister's eyes. "Your mother left a message," David said. "She'll be here at 10 tomorrow." Norma smiled automatically. "All right. Her room is ready." Behind Barbara's elegant appearance and carefully chosen words lay complex emotions. She had always looked down on Norma's generosity, constantly saying, being too kind is a sign of weakness, while secretly appreciating Carol's more calculating ways. "Mother still favors Carol, doesn't she?" Norma said, sitting on the sofa with a tired expression. David gently put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Don't worry about it. You've always done the right thing. Why should that be a problem?" "I don't know. It's just that Carol has been acting strange lately. Last week, when we went shopping together, she asked oddly specific questions about our home and my work. It was almost as if she was gathering information." David frowned. "Wasn't it just conversation?" "I hope so." Norma began, then fell silent. She feared giving voice to her anxieties would make them real. "Maybe I'm imagining things." The truth was that Norma had begun to sense something dark in Carol. The coldness behind her sister's smile, the meaningful glances Barbara and Carol exchanged in front of Norma, and Carol's unnatural attitude toward Emily. All these were signs that something was wrong. The living room clock struck 11. Outside, snow had begun to fall softly, covering Manhattan's buildings in white. Tomorrow was Christmas, a special day when family would gather, exchange gifts, and spend time together. Norma exhaled deeply. Tomorrow would surely be wonderful, she told herself, even as anxiety crept into the depths of her heart. On Christmas Eve morning, Emily woke early and helped with the final touches to the living room decorations. Like Norma, she was intelligent, considerate, and had an artistic sensibility. "When is Aunt Carol coming?" Emily asked while arranging presents under the Christmas tree. "Around noon, I think," Norma answered. "I'm glad we found that gaming system Jason wanted." Emily smiled, but her eyes revealed a touch of envy. "Jason's present was really expensive, wasn't it?" "That's not an issue, Emily. We're family. We do whatever we can to make each other happy." Emily nodded silently. She understood her mother's kindness and generosity well. But she sometimes wondered if Aunt Carol truly appreciated that kindness. Shortly after noon, the doorbell rang. Carol, Michael, Jason, and Barbara had arrived. On the surface, everyone exchanged pleasant greetings, and family photos were taken in front of the Christmas tree piled with gifts. However, Norma noticed things. Carol's smile didn't reach her eyes. Barbara made a sarcastic remark about the luxury of Norma's penthouse. "This is quite extravagant, isn't it?" And most of all, the strange look Carol gave Emily. At dinner, Barbara whispered something to Carol, and they exchanged meaningful smiles. David noticed it too and asked Norma after the meal, "Don't you think something feels off?" "I feel it too," Norma replied softly. "But tomorrow is a special day. I hope nothing goes wrong." Christmas morning, Norma woke early. Outside, snow continued to fall silently, covering Manhattan in a white blanket. She was brewing coffee in the kitchen, mentally organizing the day's schedule. Gift exchange, family breakfast, and afternoon dinner. Taking a deep breath, she hoped everything would go perfectly. "Good morning, Mom." Emily appeared in the kitchen in her pajamas, her eyes shining with excitement. "Merry Christmas, Emily." Norma embraced her daughter. "Dad's still sleeping. I was thinking of bringing him coffee to wake him up." "What time are Grandma and Aunt Carol coming?" "They said they'd be here by 9. Everything's ready, so don't worry." The living room was decorated with a large Christmas tree, and colorful gifts were arranged beneath it. Norma had prepared expensive presents for Carol, Michael, and nephew Jason. She always wanted to give her sister's family the best. At 8:30, David woke up. He kissed his wife and daughter, exchanging Christmas greetings. "How do you think today will go?" David quietly asked Norma. "The atmosphere was a bit strange last night." "It'll be fine," Norma forced a smile. "It's Christmas, so let's all have a good time." At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Barbara entered first, followed by Carol, Michael, and Jason. Warm greetings were exchanged on the surface, but Norma sensed something cold behind Carol's smile. "Merry Christmas," Carol said, hugging Norma. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes weren't smiling. Barbara gave David a perfunctory greeting before turning to Emily. "Emily, Grandma's gift for you is special. Look forward to opening it later." Emily smiled politely, but at that moment, Norma didn't miss the meaningful glance exchanged between her mother and sister. The family gathered in the living room and began exchanging gifts. Jason received a large box first, a gift from Norma and David. "Can I open it?" Jason looked at his mother, Carol. "Of course, it's from Aunt Norma and Uncle David." Carol's voice carried a hint of sarcasm. When Jason opened the box, the latest iPhone appeared. "Wow! It's the newest model," he exclaimed. "Norma, David, such an expensive gift," Michael said, looking confused. "Don't worry about it," Norma smiled. "I heard Jason wanted one." Carol uttered perfunctory words of thanks, but her eyes remained cold. She looked at Barbara and nodded slightly. As gifts continued to be opened, Emily received a present from Carol and Jason. Her face was full of anticipation. "Mom, what could this be?" Emily showed Norma a small, beautifully wrapped box. "It's wrapped so prettily." Norma smiled, though feeling somewhat uneasy. "Why don't you open it and see?" "Before that, why don't you open this?" Carol handed Emily another gift. "This is from me and Grandma." Barbara's voice had an unnaturally bright tone. Emily, with a curious expression, reached first for the small gift from Carol and Barbara. "Wait a minute," David suddenly said. His face showed concern. "Where did you buy that box?" Carol pretended to be surprised. "From a regular department store." "Why?" "No reason," David said, but his eyes remained fixed on the box. Norma sensed David's concern but didn't want to spoil the Christmas atmosphere. "Emily, go ahead and open it." Emily slowly touched the ribbon. At that moment, Norma saw a strange expectant light in Carol's eyes. Barbara also leaned forward, watching with bated breath. The air in the room seemed to freeze. The moment Emily's fingertips touched the ribbon, the room fell silent. Norma watched her daughter's profile, struck by a strange anxiety. She realized that Carol and Barbara's gazes were too eager, too full of expectation. "The wrapping is beautiful," Emily smiled. "Almost too pretty to open." She carefully untied the ribbon and cautiously opened the gold wrapping paper to avoid tearing it. Inside was a container like a small jewelry box. "Oh, lovely," Emily picked up the box. "What is this?" "Open it and see," Carol said, lifting the corner of her lips slightly. "We chose it especially for you." Barbara leaned forward, seeming to hold her breath in anticipation. Norma exchanged glances with David. He too seemed to sense something wrong. Emily opened the small box's lid. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Several small charms were attached, beautifully reflecting the light. "Oh, it's beautiful," Emily exclaimed. "Thank you, Aunt Carol, Grandma." She picked up the bracelet and held it to her wrist. That's when it happened. Emily's expression suddenly changed. Her eyes widened, and her pupils rapidly dilated. Her hands began to shake, and with the bracelet gripped tightly, her body stiffened. "Emily," Norma called anxiously. "Are you okay?" There was no response. The color drained from Emily's face, and her lips turned pale blue. The next moment, her body began to shake violently. "Emily!" Norma screamed, rushing to her daughter. Emily's body began to convulse uncontrollably, and she collapsed to the floor. Norma cried out as she tried to hold her daughter, but Emily's body was rigid and beginning to foam at the mouth. "Ambulance!" David grabbed his phone and began dialing 911. "My daughter is having a seizure. Please come quickly." Norma, though panicking, held Emily's head protectively and desperately tried to keep her body from hitting anything. Tears flowed, blurring her vision. "Emily, hang on. Please, hang on." Then Norma heard her mother's voice. Was the stimulus too strong? Barbara's voice contained laughter. Norma looked up in confusion and saw her mother. Barbara was covering her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were coldly gleaming. Beside her, Carol said, "The perfect surprise, isn't it?" Those words pierced Norma's heart like ice shards. She stared at her sister in disbelief. Carol's expression showed not fear or concern, but a kind of satisfaction. "What are you saying?" Norma shouted. "Emily is..." She couldn't finish her sentence. Emily's convulsions grew more violent, and her complexion turned gray. "Hurry!" David shouted into the phone. "My wife says our daughter has lost consciousness and is convulsing violently." Michael finally seemed to come to his senses, standing up and saying, "Is there anything I can do to help?" His face showed genuine concern. Jason sat frozen on the sofa, paralyzed with fear. "Water," Norma said in a trembling voice. "Bring some cushions." Amid the chaos, Barbara and Carol barely moved. They stood slightly apart, talking in low voices. Norma noticed this but was focused entirely on Emily. "The ambulance will be here soon," David placed his hand on his wife's shoulder and said in a shaking voice. "It'll be okay, everything will be fine." But his eyes reflected terror. Emily's seizure showed no sign of stopping, and her breathing had become shallow and irregular. Why did this? Norma looked at the bracelet in confusion. It appeared to be an ordinary accessory, But why had Emily suffered a seizure the moment she touched it? "Let me see that bracelet," David suddenly said. He carefully took the bracelet from Emily's hand and began examining it cautiously. "Something strange." His face changed as he looked at the back of the bracelet. "This is..." Just then, the doorbell rang, and paramedics rushed in. They quickly assessed Emily's condition and began placing her on a stretcher. "Please, help her," Norma begged the paramedics through her tears. She held Emily's hand tightly, refusing to let go. "Ma'am, please come with us," one paramedic said. "Your daughter's condition isn't stable. We need to take her to the hospital immediately." David acted quickly. "I'm coming too. Michael, the house keys are on the table. Could you lock up later?" Michael nodded. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything." Before getting into the ambulance, Norma looked back. Carol and Barbara stood by the living room window, watching her. Their expressions sent a chill through Norma. It wasn't concern or sympathy, but rather a satisfaction that things had gone according to plan. As the ambulance doors closed and sirens blared, one question formed in Norma's mind. Was this just a random seizure, or? She couldn't follow that thought to its conclusion. Now she had to focus only on her daughter. Norma squeezed Emily's cold hand, praying only that she would be all right. The emergency room at Manhattan General Hospital was bustling despite the Christmas morning. Emily was immediately taken to a treatment room, with doctors gathering around her. Norma and David sat side by side on plastic chairs in the hallway, holding each other's trembling hands. "She'll be okay," David repeated over and over. "She'll be fine." But there was no confidence in his voice. Norma looked at her husband with tear-blurred eyes. "That bracelet, was there something strange about it?" David exhaled deeply. "I'm not sure. But something small seemed to be embedded in the back of it. I gave it to the doctor just in case." "A device? What do you mean?" The color drained from Norma's face. "Surely not." She couldn't finish her sentence. Footsteps sounded from down the hall, and Carol and Barbara appeared. Michael and Jason were with them. Michael's face showed genuine concern, but Carol and Barbara's expressions were oddly calm. "How is Emily?" Michael stepped forward to ask. "The doctors are examining her," David answered curtly. His voice was cold. Carol tried to sit next to Norma, but David stood in front of his wife. "Could you please keep your distance?" he said in a low voice. "Excuse me." Carol opened her eyes wide in surprise. "We're family. We're worried about her." Barbara spoke up. "David, stop that attitude. We came because we're concerned about Emily." Norma stood up and stared at her mother and sister. "Really? What was that reaction earlier? When Emily collapsed on the floor, you were laughing." "That's not true." Carol's voice rose. "I was in shock and didn't know how to react." Just then, the treatment room door opened, and a doctor in a white coat emerged. The doctor's expression was serious. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams?" Norma and David quickly approached the doctor. "My daughter." Norma's voice trembled. "Your daughter is stable now. She had an epileptic seizure, but it's been controlled with anticonvulsant medication. We're currently doing a CT scan and blood tests." "Epilepsy?" David asked, looking confused. "But Emily has no history of epilepsy." The doctor nodded. "That's why we're investigating what might have triggered the seizure. We're also examining the bracelet your husband gave us." Carol took a step back. Barbara gasped. "Examining it? Why?" Barbara's voice showed agitation. The doctor turned around and looked at Barbara. And you are. I am her grandmother, Barbara said, straightening her back. The doctor nodded briefly. Mr. and Mrs. Williams told me the seizure occurred immediately after touching this bracelet. We're examining it thoroughly as a precaution. As time passed, the tension in the hospital hallway only increased. Michael took Jason to the cafeteria, while Carol and Barbara anxiously paced up and down the corridor. Norma and David were allowed to wait at Emily's bedside, hoping for her to regain consciousness. 3 hours later, the doctor entered the room with CT scan results in hand. His expression had grown even more serious. "Did you find anything?" Norma stood up to ask. The doctor led them a short distance from the bed. "We're seeing abnormal brain wave patterns. These are typical signs of an epileptic seizure. However, there are no structural abnormalities in your daughter's brain." "Meaning?" David asked. "Something likely induced the seizure," the doctor chose his words carefully. "Actually, a technician examined the bracelet. A small electronic device was embedded in it." "Electronic device?" Norma's voice rose. The doctor nodded. "A device that generates low-frequency waves. Certain electromagnetic frequencies can trigger epileptic seizures. This device was designed specifically to produce such frequencies." Norma and David were speechless. It took several seconds to comprehend the doctor's words. "So?" David's voice shook. "Are you saying someone intentionally tried to cause Emily to have a seizure?" The doctor's expression hardened. "Unfortunately, that's the conclusion we must draw. This device couldn't have been made by accident. It's a precisely crafted low-frequency generator." In Norma's mind, Carol and Barbara's faces appeared. Their strange smiles, expectant gazes, and those terrible words, was the stimulus too strong? The perfect surprise, isn't it? "The police," Norma said in a hoarse voice. "We should call the police." The doctor nodded with a grave expression. "I've already contacted them. Cases like this could involve criminal activity. Investigators will be here shortly." As the doctor headed toward the door, he turned back, his face pale. "Mrs. Williams, the cause of your daughter's collapse was definitely man-made. This was no accident. Call the police immediately." A heavy silence fell over the room. Norma and David looked at each other, sharing wordless horror and anger. Outside the hospital room, they could hear Carol and Barbara walking in the hallway. David clenched his fists tightly and took a step toward the door. "David." Norma grabbed her husband's arm. "What should we do?" "Find out the truth," he said in a determined voice. "Why they tried to hurt our daughter." Emily moved slightly in the bed. Norma quickly returned to her daughter and held her hand. When Emily opened her eyes, Norma shed tears of relief. But her heart was soon pulled back to the terrifying reality. The family she had trusted most had tried to hurt her beloved daughter. The small reception room at Manhattan General Hospital was crowded with police officers and detectives. Carol and Barbara were being questioned in separate rooms, while Michael waited with his son in the cafeteria. Norma and David, with exhausted expressions, were answering a detective's questions. "Have Carol and Barbara confessed?" Norma asked in a hoarse voice. Detective Morris, a female detective, looked up from her documents. Barbara initially claimed she knew nothing, but she broke down when confronted with evidence. Carol resisted for a while but eventually confessed. "Why?" Tears welled in Norma's eyes. "Why did they want to hurt Emily?" Detective Morris exhaled deeply. "According to Carol, it was simply because she hated you. Your success, your happy home, and above all, the financial help you provided her was humiliating." "Humiliating?" Norma was at a loss for words. "I only wanted to help my sister." Sometimes, people choose to hate those who help them rather than acknowledge their own weaknesses, Detective Morris said quietly. In Carol's case, her jealousy of you grew over the years and transformed into a twisted desire for revenge. David placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. Did you learn anything about the device? Carol's husband was not involved at all. She independently commissioned someone knowledgeable in electronics to make it. She has confessed that she knew the device emitted low-frequency waves that could potentially induce epileptic seizures. The incredible truth overwhelmed Norma. Her sister had been willing to hurt her daughter just to make her suffer. My mother? Norma asked in a trembling voice. Barbara knew about Carol's plan. Far from stopping it, she appears to have cooperated. 3 days later, Emily was discharged. According to the doctors, the temporary seizure had caused no permanent damage to her brain. However, the emotional wounds would not heal so easily. Carol and Barbara were charged with serious crimes. Michael, shocked by the events, had begun divorce proceedings against Carol. He had decided to return to his hometown of Chicago with Jason. A year later in winter, Norma stood by the window, gazing at the snowy streets. What are you thinking about? David came to her side. About family, Norma answered quietly. About what makes a real family. Carol had been sentenced to 7 years in prison and was serving her time. After a psychiatric evaluation, Barbara was found fully responsible and placed in a supervised facility. The relationship with Michael and Jason continued, but they had started a new life. How is Emily doing? Norma asked. Getting better, David smiled. The counseling seems to be working. She said she's going to the movies with friends today. Norma's expression showed relief. Emily was recovering from the terrible experience. She had grown stronger than anyone had imagined over the past year. A new member of our family is coming, Norma pointed outside the window. The figure of a young woman walking in the snow was visible. It was David's niece, Sarah. Having lost her parents in an accident, Norma and David had welcomed her into their home. I've realized there are things more important than blood ties, Norma said quietly. True affection, trust, and caring for each other. David squeezed his wife's hand. They had been hurt, but through those wounds they had found new bonds. The Christmas tree lights warmly illuminated the room, and outside, snow continued to fall silently. The pain of lost family remained, but at the same time, hope for building a new family was sprouting. Norma walked toward the door, to welcome a new member of their family.